I want to recognise that I'm joining from the lands of the Larrakia people, and those lands were never ceded, and I pay respect to our elders, past and present. We are joined by a fantastic panel of author and voice advocate Thomas Mayo, Director of Radical Reform Centre Lab Shireen Morris, and Director of Myriad Kofkin Global, Maria Dimopoulos. We're going to be speaking with Eva Hussein, Director of Polaron, and she's hosting us this afternoon along with Life Without Barriers. So Eva, would you mind giving us a short introduction?
Thank you, Jade, and I feel very privileged to be today with everyone joining in the discussion. So a process has been laid out to give Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people a greater say in decisions that affect them. It involves a change in the Constitution, and every eligible Australian will have a chance to vote later this year. We don't have a date yet, but that's going to be announced quite soon. So as a migrant to these lands and as a former refugee, I just wanted to make sure that the process of the referendum and everything around it is as informative to our multicultural communities as possible. And this is why, with the amazing partners from Life Without Barriers and a number of other partner organisations, we produce assets in more than 45 languages. I think it's 52 right now. So that includes Aboriginal resources as well, and Auslan and Easy English, so accessible resources. And really the message from me out of today is that we would love everybody that's attending this session and watching this recording later on for them to share these multilingual resources with everyone, your family, your friends, work colleagues, so that we can all get informed and engaged in this very important vote that's happening later this year. Thank you, Jade.
Thanks, Eva. So today's discussion is also a chance to place this information into context, and we can model the sorts of discussions we want to have around the nation over the coming months. So what we're going to cover off today are 4 important areas: understanding where the idea of the voice comes from, explaining how the Constitution works, we'll give you the arguments to deal with objections, how the multicultural communities can get engaged and use these resources, and critically, we'll talk about how we can come together to make history. We're committed to ensuring that Australia supports yes in response to the generous invitation embodied in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. This discussion today is the beginning of our journey to deliver our RSVP. We're using a special feedback tool to help us get an understanding of your views and your questions today. So for those of you using a laptop, you can grab your mobile and use the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the chat from your laptop. If you're joining Zoom from a mobile, then click the link in the chat. So this will mean that you're still listening to the Zoom audio, but you can use the interactive tool in your phone's browser. So jump on now and let us know that you're good by hitting the heart button, and stand by for further questions. I'll give you a minute to do that. Now, if you are having any problems, we have a tech support team on standby, so just send us a message in the Zoom. Okay, we're starting to see some hearts come through. So we'd like to know how well informed you feel about the voice at the outset of this discussion. So use your tool to gauge how well you feel informed about the voice. All right, so we're seeing it slide up close to 4. Okay, so we're sitting about 3.6. So we've got quite an informed crowd here. And you know, if you're someone who scored yourself less than that, this is a really great opportunity to get the facts and the context. All right, so let's dig in. Most big ideas have a foundational story, and for the voice, that is the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Thomas, can you give us an idea of how the statement came about and how it relates to the upcoming referendum?
Yeah, thank you, Jade. The Uluru Statement from the Heart is a culmination of many lessons throughout a long history of Indigenous people striving to be heard. There are many statements and petitions that precede the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and they all called for a voice. There's also been many times that Indigenous people have established representation, but always that representation has been taken away by a following government. So there's many lessons that go into the call for a voice, and the Uluru Statement itself came from a unique opportunity for Indigenous people to come together in regional dialogues covering the entire continent and adjacent islands. And the final thing that they did after reaching or finalising a record of meeting was they elected delegates to go to the heart of the nation at Uluru, a final 3-day convention, lots of passionate debate and discussion, and ultimately we reached a consensus there. And that is how this proposal for the Uluru Statement, or in the Uluru Statement, came to be. It calls for a constitutionally enshrined voice and a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making and truth-telling to the nation. And it's an invitation, a generous invitation to all Australians.
Thomas, would you mind sharing the statement with us? And just before you do, I want to encourage everyone to use their tool again, and let us know, as you're listening to Thomas, let us know how it makes you feel. So Thomas, I'll hand back to you to recite the statement, please.
Thank you, Jade. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land or Mother Nature and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and it coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise, that a peoples possessed the land for 60 millennia and this sacred link should disappear from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alien from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish, they will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. So let's have a look at what you were all feeling and thinking while Thomas was speaking. So we've got emotional, hopeful, moved, powerful, connected. You know, I particularly like that one. That really resonates with me. Thomas, can I ask you how you feel? You know, you've been reciting this statement for many years now. How does it make you feel?
Well, looking at those words on the screen there, Jade, I feel all of those things as well at the same time. One of the things that I'll add is opportunity. You know, this is a wonderful opportunity for our country to unite with over 60,000 years of heritage and culture, to share in that, you know, to be unique in the world, to celebrate it. Also hope, though, you know, that we are proposing here something that's tangible, something that is practical, a means for Indigenous people to be heard, that gives us precisely what we need to improve the policies and laws that lead to those awful statistics that we should be ashamed of as Australians, and that we should have a desire to change. And so I feel all of those things. But hope, especially with this great attendance here, people coming and listening, hopefully preparing to go out there and talk to other Australians. That's the main thing for me.
Mm. And Shireen, can I bring you in and find out what you feel when you hear the statement?
What always strikes me is the generosity of the invitation from Indigenous people to non-Indigenous Australians, you know, especially when you think about the history of what Indigenous people have gone through in this country. Like, I think we'll talk about in a moment, but being excluded from the constitutional discussions that gave rise to Australia and to the Constitution, and being subject to all sorts of top-down, discriminatory, unfair laws and policies early in our colonial history. And, you know, I'm talking about laws denying Indigenous people the vote in some jurisdictions right up until the 60s, laws dictating and policies dictating where Indigenous people can live, who they can marry, removing children from families, banning their languages from being spoken sometimes. And we all know, of course, denying their property rights. Yet despite all that history, and despite being excluded from Australia for so long, Indigenous people are actually saying to non-Indigenous Australians, you know, we want in, we want to be part of Australia. We want to be recognised in the Constitution, which is a permanent formal thing, you know. So this is really, I see it as a peace offering. This is an incredible peace offering, and all they're asking for is recognition through an advisory voice, not a veto, just a voice. So it's this modest, compassionate, generous peace offering, an amazing opportunity for the rest of Australia to really grasp that and answer this call, because it's a call based in love, you know. They're saying we want coexistence, we want a fairer partnership, a fairer relationship. So I'm really, really hopeful as to how Australians are going to answer that call in a few months' time at the referendum.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maria, what are your thoughts after hearing that?
It never fails to move me, no matter how often I hear it recited. And, you know, I can almost kind of feel the emotion in my voice at the moment. I think it particularly holds immense power and meaning for those of us who migrated to a country that has yet to sign a treaty with First Nations people. I think, to take up Thomas's point about opportunity, this is such a profound moment in our nation's history, but particularly an opportunity for those of us who are racialised settlers here to directly confront what I think is still unfinished business for many of us. And the Uluru Statement provides us with that opportunity to reframe a narrative that I think fundamentally has lied to so many of us. The opportunity, I think, to address those past injustices, but to respond to that incredibly powerful offer of walking together. I think for many of us who perhaps really emphasize the daily confrontation with racism, that sense of powerlessness, that the statement offers hope. So Thomas, it really, I think that point about opportunity is what I'm hoping that all of us out there, those first First Nations people, but particularly for those migrants who I think can emphasize with the importance of gaining agency over one's life, the point about self-determination that really comes through in this statement truly is such a powerful, passionate, and yet such a practical document, a gift indeed.
Look, and that is really the heart piece of the voice. And I think we can all agree on the comments made there. There is so much hope, opportunity, lots of feeling there. And now we need to get into the mechanics of how to bring that about. So to establish the voice, we need to change the Constitution. So let's have a quick civics session. And I'm going to throw to Shireen here to talk us through the process.
Yep, so that's right. To recognise Indigenous peoples in the Constitution and to guarantee the voice in the Constitution, we need a referendum to change it. So what's the Constitution? Well, it's the highest legal rule book of our country. So it's the power sharing document that the former colonies negotiated and devised back in the 1800s. So the colonies came together to forge an agreement on how they were going to run this new country called the Commonwealth of Australia. And it actually took them like a decade of negotiations, deciding the rules and principles that would govern this new country. And the Constitution itself came into force in 1901. But the problem was that no Indigenous peoples were included in any of those power sharing negotiations. So even though Indigenous people lived on this continent for over 65,000 years, there was not a single First Nations representative in those discussions. And as a result of that exclusion, the Constitution that came into force in 1901 contained clauses explicitly excluding Indigenous people and created a really top-down, unfair power relationship with Indigenous people. Now, the Constitution can only be changed through a double majority referendum. That means a majority of voters in a majority of states need to say yes to the constitutional change and a majority overall. So basically you need 4 out of 6 states to vote yes, and you need a national majority. And the territories, so ACT and the Northern Territory, only count for the national tally, not the states tally. Now, that's a really high threshold of consensus. Only 8 out of 44 referendums have succeeded in Australia's history. So we do have a constitution that is difficult to change. Now, one of the questions that often comes up about the voice is, where's the detail? And I think it's really important to understand that the Constitution is not about detail. The Constitution, as I said, is Australia's highest legal rule book. So it contains the broad structures, institutions, and principles that govern Australia's political and legal system. But it doesn't contain all the details of the institutions and principles that it establishes. The Constitution leaves those details to Parliament. And that's really important because institutional detail needs to change over time. It needs to evolve with changing circumstances, and institutions need to improve. So that's why the Constitution is about principle, but the institutional detail, all the nuts and bolts of how our system of government runs, that's by and large set up in legislation to provide flexibility. So the same is true for the voice. This referendum is about the principle. Yes or no? Should we recognise Indigenous peoples in the Constitution by giving them an advisory voice when Parliament makes laws and policies about them? That's the principle. Do Indigenous people deserve to be recognised through having a voice in their own affairs? If Australians vote yes to that principle in the upcoming referendum, then it will be up to Parliament to enact legislation determining the details of how the voice will operate and how the voice will interact with Parliament and government.
All right, thank you, Shireen. So that's the mechanics of it. Thomas, what's the ask?
Well, the ask is for people to support this campaign, to vote yes, quite simply. This voice is important, as said, to for our nation to accept our Indigenous heritage and culture, and also to do something about the problems by doing something different, which is giving us a say in the Constitution on matters that affect us. So we really want people to support this and get out there and help others understand it as well.
Mm-hmm. So the change itself is constitutional recognition through the voice, obligation on government to create a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice, and make representations that will make representations to Parliament and executive government related to First Nations.
Yep. Sorry. Yeah, that's what this will ultimately do. It'll give us a say. It'll give us the opportunity to make representations, and it really is that simple.
Yeah. So, and the purpose of us coming together is to both understand the upcoming vote and what we're being asked to change, but also to talk about the importance of our multicultural communities in this campaign. So, Maria, I might just start with you. What have you been hearing from communities that you work with?
Yeah. Thanks, Jade. And I think the sheer size of our multicultural communities means that we do have to take a very close and nuanced look at how to engage and galvanise the support across our very diverse multicultural communities. And we know that they're going to be critical to the success of this referendum. And so many of our peak organisations, I was looking at the list of people around this virtual room, there are so many out there who are just working tirelessly to increase awareness of the referendum amongst our community. So I really want to pay respect and acknowledge the incredible work that's being done out there. I know that our peak bodies like the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils of Australia, indeed in last year's annual conference, made it very clear around their support and announced their full support for the referendum and the voice. I wanted to quote from FECA's CEO, migrant refugee communities are natural allies with First Nations communities. There's something that really resonates in that. I was at a workshop the other day and Senator Dodson was actually reading from the Uluru Statement from the Heart and made reference to that line around the tyranny of dispossession. And a young fellow from a refugee background stood up and said, that speaks to me. That resonates with the truth of my history, my pre-arrival experience. And I think that connection with those shared histories is a really important platform for us to generate solidarity. I know a lot of work needs to be done. I have great faith in our multicultural communities. I think our drive for justice, our drive for truth is a really important part of what generates the sort of activism that we see amongst refugee and migrant communities, particularly against racism in this country. I know a lot of work needs to be done, particularly around building up that civic literacy. And I think, Shireen, your work has just been so significant in raising our community's awareness around that. I think there are some important points that are being fed back to us about recognising that there are nuanced approaches that are required in our community, that a one-size-fits-all doesn't work, that we recognise that there are pockets of distrust in our communities around how government, for example, generates information. I think we need to address that. I realise that there are also important points that perhaps we need to highlight, even a simple conversation with my ageing Greek mother the other day, where I made the point to her that she would need to write yes in the box, that it wasn't enough to tick a box, Now, that was a surprise to her, and we practiced writing yes. I mean, she is absolutely determined to speak to other older Greek women, to use her line, this can happen for my grandchildren, so that we don't live in a country that fails to recognise the history of dispossession, the history of injustice in this country. So I'm loving what our communities are doing. I'm celebrating the way in which our communities have really embraced the importance of not only referendum, but realising that this has to move beyond that and embrace the full vision of the Uluru Statement. But I think work needs to be done, and resources like these ones are absolutely critical. So thank you, Lifeline, and thank you, Polaron.
And Shireen, why is it important for multicultural and migrant communities to support the yes vote?
Yeah, it's absolutely crucial. You know, well, firstly, I think sometimes migrants and descendants of migrants can mistakenly feel that these kinds of big nation building conversations are not really for us. And I think it's up to all of us to really push back against that. Migrants and their descendants absolutely have a crucial role to play in this. The Constitution belongs to all Australians, and this is about all of our relationship with Indigenous people. And what I'm getting through my conversations with multicultural communities out there is really such a deep reservoir of empathy, as Maria was saying, and basic goodwill. And we can see that by, you know, every week we're getting new community, migrant and ethnic cultural organisations signing up at the website multiculturalforvoice.org. And I agree with Maria. I think it's because many of us come from countries where we too have experienced discrimination. Many of those countries have different or similar colonial histories. So there is this shared sense of history there. But it's also true, I think, that, you know, most of our families came to this country in search of opportunity and prosperity. And many, many, many of us have found that here. Like, my parents migrated from India via Fiji towards the end of the White Australia policy in the 70s, right? And they both came from really quite poor backgrounds, but got scholarships, studied, built amazing opportunities for me and my brother, where we have grown up in quite a comparatively privileged circumstances. So that Australia has given our families so much opportunity and success, and that's why so many of us love this country. But we also know the history. You know, we know that the opportunity and prosperity that this great democracy provides was built in a real sense off the back of Indigenous losses. We can't deny that. And when you have those historical conversations with multicultural Australians, that is undeniable. And this referendum actually might be our only chance, one of our only chances to give something back to the First Nations who have really lost so much in Australia's history. It's about time we gave something back. And the request is so modest, you know, the request of an advisory voice. And I think it's really important, you know, no veto, none of this scaremongering that we've been hearing from, a very pragmatic, practical request of an advisory voice when government and parliament make laws and policies about Indigenous affairs. So migrant communities are getting on board. And I totally agree with Maria that we've got to keep having those conversations, getting the proper information out there, making sure we're refuting the myths and spreading this message, not just to people who are engaged enough to come to webinars like this, but beyond, you know, to people who haven't turned their minds to this yet. So that's our challenge.
Yeah, and on that point, Eva, can I ask you, you know, what's the best way to encourage multicultural communities to get out and have the conversations and then ultimately, you know, go to the booths and vote yes? How do we engage?
Thanks, Jade. So let me firstly say that I'm going to state the obvious, but information is power. And I think one of the things that I was really keen to do, and thankfully we got amazing support from Life Without Barriers, is to get as quickly as we could as many translations as we could out there, so that communities could start the conversation. So the resources are accessible. I think we're going to see some slides on the screen in a moment, but we didn't want to make fancy videos, very complex, long, elaborate statements. All we wanted to do is create resources that are accessible, shareable, and easy to disseminate. What you're seeing on the screen there is that I think we're up to 52 languages right now. You cannot imagine how much work went into it. So we had more than 250 people working on this. So by far the biggest and the most important project we've ever worked on. And, we're super proud of it. So it's one thing to develop this resource, it's another to make sure that they get into the right place. So what we found throughout this process, and these translations have been community-led, meaning that we've worked with the communities to make sure that they resonate, that they read well, that they're accurate, and that they speak to the heart. So they're not translated by machines, they're translated by humans, 4 or 5 people behind every language. So you can imagine what an incredible resource this is. But the key now is to spread the word. So this is what we have been working on with everyone to ensure that people grab this resource, disseminate it, and they can then explore further. So these resources are very simple. They talk about what a referendum is and that it's a constitutional change, and they're written in simple language. We are planning stage 2, which hopefully will sort of explore these themes a bit more deeper. But, every day we're getting requests for languages like Burmese that are not covered, Oromo, all the Pacifica languages like, Fijian and Tongan and Samoan. So we are trying to manage people's expectations. We speak about 300 languages in Australia, so we won't be able to cover every single language we speak, but we are we've included resources that are written in easy English, plain English, Auslan, and they're simple. So the key, everybody that's listening right now or will listen to the recording and watch us later, please disseminate it, please get behind it. What we found is that people make the difference. So people that get behind the translations and they know in and out about how their communities work, where they hang around, is it Facebook, is it WhatsApp, is it something else, is it Instagram? So these I call them micro influencers, are the key to making sure the message gets out to as many people as we can. And I think that is the important bit for people to know that these resources exist and grab them. They're free, they're accessible, they are all housed on Life Without Barriers hub. So we can put a link to where they sit in a moment. But I think it is up to each one of us to make sure that their own communities, for example, my community is Polish, so I've spread the word as much as I could, so that people are informed, so that we remove this fear about what this is all about. I think already Maria and Shireen have covered a lot of the themes about what this means to migrants, to refugees. I think if we can remove fear, anxiety around what the referendum is and what it isn't, that's half of our job done, and people can explore and read more and learn more. But this is like an entry point. It's like a funnel. So we've developed information that's accessible and in as many languages as we could. So to answer, in answer to your question, Jade, it's about each of us talking to families, talking to friends, talking to our networks, our communities, and letting them know that these in-language resources are available, so that we can get all informed more than what we're hearing on TV or wherever else people get information from. That would be my advice to everyone, and I'm very pleased that so many people came along today to listen to what we have to say.
Absolutely. And Eva, as an Aboriginal woman, I'm actually just a little bit choked up at the moment, seeing all the work, all the effort that's gone into this, and this is absolutely brilliant. And really highlights the unifying opportunity. You know, here we are with all of our communities coming together to walk on this journey, and that's what this is really about. And I think there's a lot of sharing and connection that's happening along the way. So come referendum time, we will be a much more unified nation than we were, say, a year ago.
And Jed, I just wanted to add that now is not the time to sit on the fence. Like when we first started talking about creating these resources with Claire and Tabitha and Jacinta and Trelawney from Live Without Barriers and people on our team, we wanted to get it out now. It'll be, you know, next month it's too late. We want communities to know this information right now in the most accessible and quick, clear way, so that they can explore it more. So we rushed and worked like crazy behind the scenes. You know, honestly, this was like a mammoth effort, and we're extremely proud that as a, you know, community-led and refugee-led and women-led organization, we were able to partner up with so many people that have funded this, because this is another thing. You know, everybody along the way got paid for working on it. But I think there are people in our community of translators, interpreters, community leaders that will push this message further now that this resource exists. And I think the time is now. Don't sit on the fence, get involved, spread the word.
Yep, 100%. That's exactly right. Thank you. And as we know, there is vigorous public debate underway. And it's really important to get that right information out there in an accessible way. And what we're going to do next is we're going to answer a few frequently asked questions, because it is important that we listen to people's concerns and that we have the right information, the right arguments to give them that, you know, like you said before, take the fear away, give the right information, encourage people to feel empowered to have these conversations. What is important is, you know, people will want to hear from people that they love and trust. So it's important for you to have the information and be able to reassure your loved ones that, yeah, I've looked into this. This is a great idea. This is what we want to do, and give them that, you know, confidence that they can vote yes. So we'll move to the frequently asked questions now. You'll see them on your screen. And if you could just, using your tool again, rate them in importance. Okay, so we are seeing in first place, we have, do all First Nations people support it? You know, that's a great question that we get asked a lot. And Thomas, I'm going to throw to you. Can you talk to us about that? Do all First Nations people support the voice?
Yeah, thanks, Jade and everybody. Well, firstly, of course, all First Nations people don't think the same. We're no more homogenous than any other group. We have different views, different experiences, different perspectives, different politics, all those types of things like any other group of people. But what's important to understand is that a great majority of Indigenous people certainly support this. We know that firstly through the extensive process, very well informed, truly covering the entire continent and adjacent islands, you know, that process that led to the making of the Uluru Statement, that endorsement in the heart of the nation, identified that when we consider the history of our struggle, when we put our minds together, think about what the best steps forward are, a great majority of our people support it, and that was the endorsement of the Uluru Statement itself. Secondly, there has been multiple polls done that indicate well over 80% support from Indigenous people, and those samples in that polling was proportionately higher than polls, the samples in polls of in normal politics about you know, parties that are, you know, political parties that are preferred and all that sort of stuff. So a very solid evidence base there from polling, over 80% support. Further, that if you really listen to Indigenous people, and I saw in the comments earlier about remote communities being unaware, there were certainly representatives from a great majority of remote communities. That's the way that the process that led to the making of the Uluru Statement was. It had a unique opportunity for our people in a resourced way from the remotest of communities to have time, and resources to come together and have those discussions. So certainly remote communities were represented. But if you go to any Indigenous community, you listen deeply to an Indigenous person, even if they don't know what is coming about this referendum and the technicalities of this voice, all Indigenous people are tired of not being heard. All Indigenous people want a voice about the decisions that are made in our communities. And so that really brings us to some common sense then. Of course, Indigenous people want to be heard. Of course, Indigenous people want the means to be able to close the gap, to improve our lives and our children's lives in the future. This is something that has great support, and I hope that you carry that confidence out in your discussions. And if you come across an Indigenous person that doesn't support it, accept that. Accept that we're entitled to have different views and perspectives, and understand that some of it comes from just low trust of processes of government because of all the terrible things that have been done to us, and therefore the traumas that are carried. Accept that those different opinions will be there, but still go forward with confidence that you have been invited through the Uluru Statement from the Heart to do everything that you can to see this be a success.
And Thomas, we often get asked as well, will this make a practical difference? Like how will this make a difference on the ground?
Well, in a democracy, a voice matters. When the people aren't heard, then the statistics that we see for Indigenous people are the reality. The voice is all about improving policies, improving the decisions that are made about Indigenous people, about the issues that are common across our communities especially. The voice is going to prioritise things like health and education and employment. Another common issue is housing in our communities, the justice system, improving how the justice system treats our people and understands the traumas that we carry, and is about improving programs to see our people have better lives. These are the things that the voice will focus on. And this voice, with the backing of the Australian people through a successful referendum, will have great influence on those policies that impact our lives. And so it's a very, very practical thing. There's a lot of evidence that the best programs and the best policies are when Indigenous people are part of shaping those policies and programs from their inception. There was a rare opportunity, a rare moment where we were listened to during COVID, for example. Indigenous communities were involved in the response, communities that have great vulnerability to pandemics because of our existing health issues and because of crowded housing and all those types of things. When we were involved in shaping and implementing the response to COVID, we got the best results, some of the best results in the world. I think there were 6 times less infections in our communities, no deaths, and something that is recognised in the world. The Koori courts is another example. Programs for Aboriginal birthing, culturally informed and safe. These programs are the best, and they're always when Indigenous people have a voice.
Absolutely. Maria, now I think we've talked a lot about the opportunity here and how it's, this whole thing is uniting us already, but, we do get asked a lot, and it is in the media a lot. Will it unite or divide us as a nation? What's your thoughts on that?
I think, well, without a doubt, I am very much of the view that this is an opportunity to unify, but to unify around a particular vision, I think, of healing and recovery towards that shared future. I just don't understand, Jade, how one could reject the promise of truth and of embracing truth and of recognising the profound harm that the dispossession and colonisation has had on First Nations people. If you care about that, then to me it's a no-brainer about accepting the importance of addressing that, of working towards a future where healing and recovery is at the heart of what we want to do, where that version of truth, the colonial version of truth, which in effect has been a fundamental lie, where we reject that, where we embrace a narrative that is about inclusion, that's about human rights, and that's about all of us. I think that, to me, is the power of a unifying movement like this one. But Jade, I think it is important to keep saying this, that for me, and I think for many of the colleagues that I work with, whilst the voice will be a critical turning point, a reckoning in this country's history, I think it's important that we not sort of then feel like we've done our job at the end of that. There is still the process around the Makarrata and about embracing, I think, the truth-telling and treaty process that needs to happen as well. It is about sustaining, I think, the whole sort of movement that's going on here. But what an exciting opportunity to be part of something that I think can really ground all of us. A unifying movement.
Absolutely, Maria. Yeah, I totally agree. Now, Maria and Shireen, we're going to move on to some of the questions from the audience. So starting with, during the 2017 Marriage Equality Survey, the No campaign was successful in turning out the no vote amongst called communities and suburbs. How do we make sure this does not happen with the Voice referendum? Are there any parallels or lessons we can learn from the Marriage Equality campaign?
Maria, did you want to go first?
No, go ahead, Shireen.
Yeah, so look, I think we can't make any assumptions about where multicultural communities sit on the political spectrum. I think they're diverse. Some vote Labor, some vote Liberal, some vote swinging voters, you know, just like all other Australians. But I think what the same-sex marriage survey showed was some socially conservative sentiments in some multicultural communities. So I think what's really important is that we engage across the political spectrum when it comes to multicultural communities and Australians at large. This is bigger than left or right, you know. This transcends Labor, Liberal or Greens. This is about all Australians. And I think it comes down to each of us taking responsibility to have the genuine conversations in our own communities. So I think we need to be aware of the lessons of the same-sex marriage referendum. And in some ways, this is a harder task in some ways, because everyone probably knows a gay person. You know, there's a direct link there. It's easier to develop that empathetic connection. Not everyone in Australia potentially knows an Indigenous Australian person or has been to an Indigenous community. So we need to work harder. We need to work so much harder because we've got the added threshold of the double majority referendum, because this is a constitutional change. And what I would say to everyone who's listening now is we've got maybe 3 months, 3 and a bit months, depending on when the referendum is held. I think we should be optimistic because there is immense goodwill, but we cannot afford to be complacent. So I think now is our opportunity. We've got the fantastic language resources, but each and every one of us needs to take responsibility and take initiative for organising the conversations, you know, doing whatever it is you can think of, to whether it's inviting people on your street, for example. And by the way, I spent this last weekend letterboxing my street to get people over to my house and to a community centre locally to have these conversations, bring an Indigenous leader along as well, and share resources and get the conversations going. You know, could you run a kitchen table conversation in your home for your friends, family and neighbours? You don't need sophisticated resources. You could just letterbox the street and door knock and invite everyone over for a cup of tea. Could you do something at your local church or your local mosque, you know, your local community group? Now's the time to act. This is how we are going to get this over the line.
And we've had another question along those lines around, you know, can we consider engaging more migrant resource centres, ethnic orgs and ethnic media, community ethnic radio? So that was a question from the audience, Shireen.
Absolutely. And I think what we've tried to do with multiculturalforvoice.org is we've tried to start doing some of that, but I'm sure all of you on the line have excellent connections and networks in that regard as well, probably far better than we do sometimes. So definitely reach out to them. Try to get a journalist interested in the growing support of multicultural communities. Think about how you could get on with an Indigenous leader on the local language station to help share these conversations across ethnic media in different ways. So and of course, all the social media platforms as well. So we need to be engaging young and old, you know, and as I said earlier, across the political spectrum. Some of the most useful conversations you can have are the more difficult ones. You know, it can be quite easy talking to people who are already supporters, but sometimes when a conversation is harder work or a group discussion is harder work, that's when you're going to get the most payoff. And indeed, that's what has seen the growing number of community organisations signing up to multiculturalforvoice.org. That's actually the result of some quite robust conversations where communities are given the opportunity to ask their questions, have the discussion, and get their heads around this issue, but it pays off. So it's worth the hard work.
And Jade, can I just add the power of local government in this conversation as well? What I'm seeing is the way in which so many local government councils are mobilising those grassroots communities and talking through any of the kind of concerns and addressing the misinformation that's out there. So I think we mustn't forget that whilst multicultural and ethno-specific organisations, radio and media are so critical, there's no doubt about that, that we mustn't forget that many of our communities are engaged with things like the local government, you know, the closest level of government to the people. And certainly my involvement over the last few months with local councils has increased. And I think the work that they're doing really needs to be acknowledged. They really are galvanising a lot of those multicultural grassroots communities.
Maria,
can I respond to something in the chat there, just about a lot of federal support has already been given to Indigenous people, which goes to this misconception that, you know, billions of dollars are spent on Indigenous affairs and given to Indigenous people already, and so why aren't things improving? The issue is that without a voice, a lot of this money doesn't reach the people that need it most in our communities. There is not a lot of accountability for the bureaucracy. There is not any great transparency. And so the voice is really about seeing that there is better outcomes for the money that is spent, and that is good for our economy as well as being good for Indigenous people and improving our lives. So this is not a waste of money, as some are saying. If we were to rely on government to fix these things, that hasn't worked without a voice. This is really about getting better outcomes, seeing taxpayer dollars spent better and being much more effective and efficient. Thank you.
Can I just add, sorry, if you are someone who wants to get active, sign up as an ambassador on multiculturalforvoice.org. We've just added that to the website. So that's a way for you to connect with what we're doing, what Yes23 is doing, get active, start accessing the resources and being a leader and an advocate in your community for this work. So check it out.
Excellent. All right, well, we're almost out of time. So we've heard why we're doing this. We've heard the history, we've heard the importance and what the ask is and how we're going to go about it. Now we want to understand three things. First, what is your level of understanding now after hearing this session? Secondly, whether you're planning to support the voice, you know, as in if the referendum was today, would you be voting yes? And finally, let us know your enthusiasm for getting active in the campaign. So like Shireen said, there's a number of ways you can get active. What's the appetite after having this session with us? All right, so I'm seeing that we've moved slightly in terms of how informed we're feeling. Oh no, actually it's still moving. So we've seen a good increase here, and we do have more resources that are being shared with you. So if today's discussion has inspired you to find out more, there is certainly a lot of resources. There is the Yes23 website, which is yes23.com.au. Other resources are being shared as well. So get amongst that. And in terms of getting active in the campaign, Shireen's given us some ideas on how to do that. That's also on your phones now. You should see a list of ways to get involved. And by turning up today, you've joined us on our trip from base camp into a better future. And we've talked about how amazing this opportunity is to unite our communities. And I'm really seeing that. Again, Eva, the work that has been put into the translations is just incredible. The campaign over the coming months will be about solidifying Yes supporters while leaving the door open for convincing those who are not yet decided that this is the right decision for the nation. It's how we vote, and it's also importantly the conversations we have with those around us to reach an informed decision. So we've talked about how we do that. We need you to sign up to Yes23, and that's how you're going to keep informed about events like this and other campaign activities. The campaign is all about giving you the tools to build your own community networks, creating a roster to hand out flyers at local markets or schools. You know, it's going to give you tangible ways to go out and spread this message. Eva, how do we make the most of the great resources your team has put together?
Okay, well, thank you firstly to everybody for joining us today. And I do feel inspired by the words and the passion around the room. So I think now is the time to spread the word. It's very important for all of us to get onto it and, you know, keep spreading the word. But how do we do that? In the chat box, you'll see the link to the resources that I've mentioned earlier. And please share them amongst your community, within the language groups that you might be active in. And, you know, start a conversation with your neighbors, with your family, with your friends. Let's say, as of today, you send these resources to 5 different people, 5 friends, 5 family members. You can imagine how quickly they would spread. So I feel very honored to be part of today, and thank you. Spread the word is the message of today.
Thanks, Eva. And just finally, let's for a moment imagine what success looks like. What would a yes vote mean to each of you? Thomas, if we can begin with you.
For me, quite simply, it means a better future for all of us, for all Australians. You know, we could be proud to be the oldest continuing living civilization on Earth, you know, and it would also mean that we improve Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's lives. That's good for my children. That's why I'm so committed to this. You know, it really is something that is unifying, hopeful, practical, and the right thing to do.
And Shireen, what would the yes vote mean to you?
I agree with Thomas. So this is a practical change that can have immense benefit in helping Australia close the gap. And of course, that's good for all Australians, because as long as Indigenous Australians are left behind, we're all diminished and we all pay for that. So we need to improve that. But equally, this is going to be a unifying moment for the country. And Noel Pearson often talks about the 3 stories that brought together make us one unified Australia. The ancient Indigenous heritage that will be recognised and given voice to in this referendum if we vote yes, and the the British institutions that were implanted on this soil, which gave rise to the great democracy, which we all benefit from, but also our multicultural achievement. This is really our opportunity to bring those 3 strands together to create a more united country.
And Maria?
I've been reading a book by the great Archie Roach. If I could just end on a quote that I really felt spoke to me. We live in one of the most blessed countries on this earth. We are one of the most blessed people on this earth because of that. We all come from a sacred place, the beginning, and we can all journey back as one people and be the authors of a new story for this country. Thanks, Jade.
Thank you all. Now, let's all go with the information we have now, the resources at hand, and ensure that Australia votes yes in 2023. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.